Morning, Nancy. Good morning, Pat. Glad to have you both with us.
Do you want to light candles?
Well, good morning and welcome. This day has been a long time coming. Last fall, I received a phone call from a woman by the name of Esther Brown. Said she was from Lowell, Massachusetts, and a graduate of the College of West Africa, and that she and some fellow alumni would like to make something of a pilgrimage to the church that is named after Melville B. Cox and to the city in which he grew up. And we talked for many months about when this might happen. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it kept getting pushed off further and further into the future. But today it has come together, and we are so grateful to have Esther and friends with us, and we'll get a chance in a moment to be introduced to them. It was also about this time that I came across a history of Melville B. Cox that was in one of the file cabinets downstairs in my office, and I discovered this wonderful history had been written by Bishop Clifton Ives way back in 1961. And thankfully it had been edited and used since that time, edited by Pat Thompson, the chair of our commission, historical commission for the conference. And back in 2012, when the church became a historic site, it was utilized at that time. I was grateful though that Bishop Ives was available, willing to come this morning. As some of you are aware, Bishop and Jane Ives were married in the sanctuary 62 years ago. You'll have to tell me what year that was. And we just discovered this morning that their anniversary and my wife and I, our anniversary is on the same day. And so that was a wonderful thing to learn. We just passed 40 years. We have a ways to go to catch up to them, but we're gonna try, At this point, I'd like to open in prayer, and then I'm gonna ask Esther if she would introduce our guests, and then we're going to invite Bishop Ives to share with us about the life and ministry of Melville Cox. Let us be in prayer together. O gracious and loving God, we are truly grateful when days like today come together after many months of conversation and planning, in which we can come together through our mutual connection to the Reverend Melville B. Cox, born and raised in this area, instrumental in the building of this church building, but more importantly, a person who has come to be known far and wide for his love for the Liberian people and his willingness to share the good news of Jesus Christ with them, even at the cost of his own life. And so we come together in his honor and in his memory with gratitude for College of West Africa and these students who have spread their wings far and wide and have been utilized by you in many different ways and places, but who now come to this place as a pilgrimage, as a way to pay their honor and respect to Melville Cox. Bless now this time that we have together, for we ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Yes, you might want to step up here because that's as far as my microphone cord will go.
Good morning, everyone. So today I am pleased to have with me Asa Lucinda Brown, Ella Mae McBorough Wright, Mona Elliott Doe, Modu Elliott Collins, Fiano Whittimer, and Mr. Theodore Collins, Modu's husband, who came along as our photographer. By the way, Modu and Theo got married on Sunday.
This past Sunday?
This past Sunday. We'll tell you more about this love story tomorrow.
It is our pleasure to have you with us, and today we have a variety of members of the Cox Memorial United Methodist Church who are here as well. We look forward to getting better acquainted with you. There's a light luncheon right after the program downstairs in the fellowship hall. And later on, I will share with you on the PowerPoint some of the sites that you will want to take in today or tomorrow. And tomorrow, we will have opportunity to hear from them in the 10 o'clock worship service, hopefully sharing about the history of the College of West Africa and how it has impacted their lives and why it is that they wanted to make this journey all the way to Hallowell, Maine. Thank you. At this time, I do want to welcome Bishop Clifton Ives, and we are so grateful that he was available to come today. I've learned all kinds of interesting things about he and his family. He has a son who lives just up the hill, probably no more than 100 yards from the church. And of course, Jane grew up in Hallowell and is related to all manner of folks here at the church and in the community. So it's just a great opportunity to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rich, for the opportunity to be here again. This pulpit, not the one that was here. That was the pulpit then, probably, where I first preached when I was a teenager. I was probably sitting in the middle in those days, but I was here for a youth rally. This church was full of youth from all over this region as we were having one of our youth days, or whatever we called it. So I have fond memories of this place because I came later to speak to a group of people who were here, and it was in the room where you will have refreshments later. When I noticed across the room a beautiful blonde girl, she never came and spoke to me. I never went and spoke to her. But I just remembered that moment when I looked across and there was this unknown woman, young woman. Little did I know that Hazel Rand, who was a member of the youth group here at Hollowell, was her good friend. And she was dating a person who lived in the same town where I lived. She called me up one night and she said, Bob's coming up on Saturday and love to have you come up and I'll fix up a date for you. That's all I knew. That's all she told me. So I came to Hollowell with Bob that night. And she came downstairs and I met her for the first time. We were married here 22 years ago, 62 years ago. 62 years ago. You got your beat by 22. That's why I got the 22.
Yes, I know.
But Jane's with me today. Where to begin? Let me tell you about Per Hassing to begin with. Per Hassing came from the mission field to teach missions at Boston University School of Theology. It was my first year in seminary. Second semester, I took a course on missions. I remembered my experience here at Cox Memorial and Jane's relationship to this place. We'd only been married a couple years at the time. When I wrote this paper, here's the original, somewhere here. At it. There it is. I wrote this for Per Hassing, for a missions course, my first year in seminary, and never dreamed that it would ever see the light of day anywhere else until the good people in Hollowell, came upon it, or Pat Thompson came upon it and produced it in a form which I see down here, which may be available to you today. So you'll have the whole thing. So I don't have to give you the whole load, okay? But I probably will anyway. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But so first, Per Hassing. Then I was invited to preside at the Africa Central Conference early after my election to be a bishop. It was probably about 1997, maybe 98, that we were on our way to Angola to the Africa Central Conference where I would preside. When I learned on the airplane that our plane was going to land before we got there in Monrovia, my heart jumped. And you cannot imagine the feeling that I had as I stepped from that airplane, a feeling of deep, deep gratitude that my foot was landing on the same place Reverend Cox had set his foot so long ago. It was a holy moment. We were squeezed into a little room that people come into, or back in those days came into when they came. It was a little tiny room. And we were in there, a group of us. All the people were watching us. And all we did was stand there and look at each other. But it was a moment. I was in that land, so precious to so many. Well, I didn't know where to begin, so I went through my document and I started marking things that I might read to you. And I got all the way to the end, and I looked at it again, and I looked at it again. And this morning, when I took a final look at it, I decided that I would begin, not at the beginning, but at the end, and go backwards, okay? Because I knew you were going to be here. So, and you're all graduates of the school. So I went to the end and began. Those traveling to Liberia today may see hold this up right, read it right. They could see today where Melville Cox began. They may see the Italian marble memorial monument, 8 feet in height, which was raised through the efforts of Rufus Spaulding. They may also see the Cox Memorial Building at the College of West Africa, the oldest school in Liberia, a living tribute to Melville Cox. And then Pat Thompson wrote the conference historian, edited this. She fixed it up for us. And put afterwards after it. How many of you have seen that monument? Remember seeing the monument? The Melville Cox? The Cox?
Oh, the grave. Yeah. Yes.
8 feet high?
Yes.
Remember what it said on it? Let me just...
No, without. Be given up.
Yeah. It says, in memory of Reverend Marvin B. Cox, the first missionary from the Methodist Episcopal Church in the United States to Liberia, Western Africa. He arrived in Monrovia on the 9th of March, 1833, where, having organized a branch of the same church, died in triumph of Christ's faith on the 21st of July in the same year at the age of 33. He was truly an amiable man, a devout Christian, and an able and successful minister of Jesus Christ. That's what the monument says. Let me go back a little bit in this document. We'll catch up to that event, okay? To that reality. Cox had been in Africa only 3 days when he entered into his journal an outline of his plans, his original plans for the Methodist Church in your country. To establish a mission and a school at Grand Bassa and place there Reverend James Washington as a local pastor who had just arrived from Virginia. He would establish a New York mission at second. He would establish a New York mission in Sego on the Niger, which would have a strategic position in the hinterland of Liberia. 3, he wanted to establish a school in Monrovia patterned after Maine Wesleyan Seminary, Kent Hill School, which still exists, to help support the pupils there. And and have a large farm at the school, and so forth. A fourth mission would be to open at Cape Mount, possibly in the interior. He was uncertain which was more necessary. That could be determined later. So those are the four things right on that he said he was going to be about when he got to Liberia. When he arrived, the churches which existed were loosely organized and were served by unordained preachers. March 17th, it's your birthday, Jenny. March 17th, he called an official meeting, a conference. Call it a conference. It was the first conference on March 17th. Conference of church leaders, and after some discussion, he was accepted as the superintendent of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Liberia. So he went as a missionary. There are no ordained pastors there. And he is accepted by those unordained pastors as their district superintendent. He prepared a report that went to the Board of Missions in New York, which extended the outline and objectives that he had started with in his journal. He also completed his sketch of West Africa, which he had made as he came down the coast, sailed down the coast. On March 19th, he began the first African camp meeting at Caldwell. And on April 6th, he organized the first Sunday school in Liberia, which was attended by 70 pupils. The formal establishment of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Liberia was accomplished by April 9th in 1833. When the pastors and church leaders adopted, it was established when the pastors and the church leaders adopted a set of resolutions which accepted Cox as their superintendent, pledged support for his work, adopted the Articles of Religion and the general rules, pledged that they would not administer the sacraments until properly able to do that. We patterned the church after the Americans, acknowledged the authority of the General Conference and American Methodist Episcopal Church, requested the ordination of A.D. Williams by the bishop so that they would be not deprived of the sacrament should Cox die. And he promised to enter diligently into the work of the ministry. That's the work of the first conference that he held a few days after he arrived. This work was accomplished none too soon. Cox had worked as rapidly as possible because he feared that he might contract malaria. On April 12th, a month and 3 days after starting was standing on the soil of Liberia, Cox was stricken with the dreaded disease of African fever. He lived for 3 more months, but for all the practical purposes, his mission to Liberia had come to a close. At the time he fell sick, many others were also sick, including the doctor. He was left to suffer alone. Turned to prayer, as he had so often, in the grove near his home in Hollow. Remember that, in the grove near his home in Hollow. By May 5th, felt better. He was able to send a report of his work to the mission board in New York. The next week, he had a relapse. During the days that followed, he suffered another attack, which left him very weak. He was so weak that the next 2 months, he only entered 2 pages in his journal. He waited anxiously as he saw ships docked on which he had hoped that Spaulding and Wright, 2 who were supposed to follow him, watching for them to arrive. They never arrived from Melville. On June 26th, he made his last entry in his journal. And he wrote, "It is now 4 days since I have seen the physician. The governor is confined to his room. My fever is dreadfully high last night. This morning, I feel feeble, as mortal can feel. To God, I commit my all." On July 21st, with words, "Come, come," on his lips, the Savior came and met him, and they walked with eternity together. Marvin Cox's death at the age of 33 on September 25th, 1833, the secretary of the mission board read a letter informing others of his death. At that same meeting, it was announced that Rufus Spaulding, James Samuel Osgood Wright, and their wives, and Miss Sophorina Harrington would sail for Liberia. All of these persons came from Massachusetts, thus giving the New England area a proud place in the history of the Liberian Methodist Church. Then I'm going to go back to the beginning, okay? I mean, sometimes you need to remember the end of the story because you understand the beginning of the story a little bit more clearly when you do. So let me go back earlier in the story. Can't even remember where I was supposed to go back to now. That's what happened for me. Let's go back to here. I love it when somebody does when they're selling books, they come and they read sections from their book because they want you to buy the book. And they pick up a couple of places. And this book is not for sale. You can have it. But the story is amazing to me every time I read it. Captain James Cox, grandfather of Melville Cox, immigrated to Hollowell, Maine, which then was a district of Massachusetts, in 1757. Following the war, he was in the American Revolutionary War. He enlisted. He was here. he returned to Hollowell, where he lived until his death in 1808. That would be his grandfather. Following the river, he returned. His son, Charles, married Martha Goodwin. Remember the name Martha. They settled on a farm. That's what people did when they came to Maine. They settled on a farm. But then their eyes were so close to the river here. Hollowell had ships coming and going. It was a busy port up the river. This is all tidal water out in front of us here. So a lot of people would farm, but then they'd see these ships and all the excitement that was going on. So a lot of these farmers would go off to sea. He was a farmer. He went to sea. He had 7 children. Martha had 7 children. The last 2 youngest boys were Melville and Gershom Cox, twins, born here. Skip on. Talks about the death of the other children and things that were going on in their family. What a tragic scene it must have been for Martha Cox to see her husband, 3 sons, die on foreign soil, to bury a young daughter, and to live and care for the children. He died at sea. The 2 twins were separated for the first time. Melville went to work on somebody else's farm. His brother went to work in another household. They were separated. And those days, people didn't have insurance. That's what they did. They would separate their family in order to get by. After the family broke up, Melville never again had any formal education. Story about him when he was in the farm, he would read at night, he would study on his own, and just a very, very sad child, brokenhearted, away from his twin brother. And it was a very, very difficult time for a young boy. But it says in the writings that in all of my material I went through, that Melville Cox's parents were among the first members of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Hollowell. He and Gershom, his twin brother, were the first children to be baptized in the church. From an early age, he was exposed to the religious teachings through his family, Martha, his mother, and the church, even though separated. Now, they were baptized together. And there's a record of that here. Pat Thompson refers to that here. You can see in the document about that. So I don't need to tell you any more about that, other than the fact that he was like an orphan kid, because without a family, brokenhearted, trying to make it by. wanted to read you this section about his. Melville was 18 years old when he attended the funeral of his uncle, a former Methodist pastor. He was not moved by anything the words of the preacher said that day at the funeral. But his cousin Mary challenged his thinking while walking with Mary and some others, cousins, after the funeral. She challenged him to come and see for yourself. Taste and see how good the Lord is. These words coming from the lips of a girl who had just witnessed her own father's funeral had a profound effect on Melville. After he left his cousin, he stopped in a grove on the way to pray. Remember that. He stopped in a grove, the woods, to pray. He might seek to know God. He stated that on that occasion, his sins departed before him, particularly the sin of resistance to the Holy Spirit. He was resisting the Holy Spirit. He was confessing his sin of resistance. In June 1818, Melville heard Bishop George preach at the New England Conference, which was held in Hollow. His text was, "And the gospel shall be preached in all the world, and shall the end come." End of quote. That same evening, he heard Reverend T preach and had a strong desire to be led to the altar, but no one invited him. He went away, he says, quote, groaning and being burdened. The following Sunday evening, he was reminded by his own minister at the church service that even the greatest sins are forgiven when one seeks to know God with all his heart. After the service, Melville went right to the grove, went to the woods again to pray. But he says he felt no change in his solitude. Finally, he says, I concluded I must give up. Between despair and hope, I'm about to do so. And in that moment, in a twinkling of an eye, my heart was filled with joy. I praised God. I felt light. I looked around to see the new sun and the new earth that I had been taught to suspect. It was the same, only now they wore a smile rather than gloom. The change was in me. 18 years old, beginning to change. Following his conversion experience, he took an active part in the church class meetings, became a devout Christian. In his journal of 1820, he gives an indication that he had reached a religious conviction that was perhaps anticipating the life in the ministry. So I was beginning to feel called to ministry. 1820, Reverend James Williams, Holloway pastor, invited him to preach out at Reedfield. Now, Reedfield is just a few miles from here. Invited him to preach out there, and he went out there with fear and trembling. It says he preached in Reedfield at the schoolhouse, a little schoolhouse out there, which takes me back in memory. My father served when I was a small child in Winthrop and in Reedfield. And we used to go out. We used to go out to Winthrop was a big church, and Reedfield was the little church out in the country line. And we'd go out there for services at what is now the Jesse Lee Memorial United Methodist Church. It's the oldest church Methodist community in Maine. It's the second oldest church. The oldest church is in East Monmouth. That's the oldest church building in continual use. But the church in Reedfield is the one that I remember, which is the oldest congregation still in existence. And right below it, there was a little schoolhouse when I was a child. It was an old one-room schoolhouse, kind of broken down, but we would go in there for because the church didn't have anything more than just a sanctuary. That was a place where the vacation church school could be, down in the old schoolhouse. And when I read this, I think, that's probably where he was. That might not have been the building, but I bet that's where the original building that he preached in was. I could show you that spot. It's right, it's still right there below the church, from which you can see Mount Washington on a clear day. Well, Melville is, you see him just beginning to mature and beginning to grow. But his health at the age of 25 began to deteriorate. The symptom of health began to. He tells me to go back and read Pat's foreword here. So let me read. He wasn't able to continue, to move into itinerant ministry because his mother was still here in Hollowell. He would come back and stay with her. In 1826, during the year in which Melville Cox lived at home in Hollowell with his mother, and he ran a bookstore here in town. Go down on the main street. If you stop on the main street down here, don't stop on the main street. Stop there, but go down where the wooden chairs are, down along the river, and then walk down river, and you'll see the old road that went down along the waterfront. That's probably the street they're talking about. There was a bookstore down there somewhere. It's just the old road that goes behind what are now apartments above the buildings out back. I'm sure that's where it was. And he worked so he was there. Gave him an opportunity with his bookstore to be close to books. Books were important to him all his life. At that time, he became secretary of a group of men entrusting with locating and purchasing a place for the property in Hollowell for a new and larger Methodist Episcopal church. That's what they were looking for, this place. The church is still, this church, some of you folks know this already, still has the records of the transactions of this group of people, written in his handwriting, written in Marvin's handwriting, because he was the secretary of the group, about what went on in the purchase of this piece of property on which this church was ultimately built. And the stained glass windows that you've already seen, probably as you came in, take a closer look when you go. In the front of the church were installed in 1912 paid for by the church members and clergy of the annual conference. And in 1932, 100th anniversary of when Melville went to Africa, the church was named as the Cox Memorial. On the 100th anniversary, the church was named Cox Memorial, United Methodist Church. 60 years later, in 1992, it was recommended by the General Commission on Archives and History that this become a United Methodist shrine. There aren't a lot of those around the world, but this is a United Methodist shrine. I love to tell people that Jane and I where Jane and I were married in 1959 is now the United Methodist shrine. Doesn't that sound good? Some people don't understand that it had nothing to do with me that this church became a Methodist shrine. But I like to tell people that. I like to tell them. That's just to go back to page 8. Is this a good way to go through this?
Yes.
Okay. We won't be much longer, just a few minutes. Talk about the difficulty of his health. And then he spent the next year, 1827, traveling through the South, trying to find a favorable climate for his health. Often he was unable to preach on Sundays because his lungs and his voice troubled him. Nevertheless, wherever he went, he had strength and even did prevail under great suffering as he moved forward. In February of 1828, he married the daughter of a distinguished family in Baltimore. He's gone south, went to Virginia, he's gone south, and he's trying to find a place where he can be more healthy and can be more productive. And in Baltimore, he married Ellie Cromwell. And they went to live with her widowed mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor Lee, at Clover Hill, her Clover Hill estate. That must have been, quite a nice place to be. Their marriage was very happy, according to Gershom Cox. What character appears to have united. Her quality, talking about his wife. Her quality character appears to have united very lovely with all the traits ever found in a husband could desire. Affection between them was most fervent. At Clover Hill, Marvin was very happy. But in the years past, it was impossible for him to preach. What a frustration. What a frustration. Nevertheless, he soon became restless at Clover Hill, and he and Ellen moved to Baltimore, where he became the editor. So he's going to be working in some kind of literary field, it seems, and he becomes the editor of a Methodist magazine defending the principles of Methodism. Well, we need some of those right now. But by the end of 1829, he was $1,000 poorer than when he became editor of the Itinerant. And his health had failed considerably, so he was forced to retire. The following year, which he has called his moonless night, Sick himself, as he always was, he buried his beloved wife on New Year's Day, 1820. That's the year Maine became a state, 1820. She died while giving premature birth. Before the year was over, he had also buried his only child and 3 brothers-in-law. But Melville Cox was a man of extraordinary faith in God, and even in years of the moonless night, would not cause him to surrender his soul. In his deepest hour of gloom and intense loneliness, he accepted his fate in the spirit that it was the hand of God working through his salvation, working out his salvation. In a letter to Gershom, his brother, said, "Bitter indeed is my cup, if God had not prepared it. But I know I feel that he is too wise to err and too good to be unkind." The moonless night was over, and he was advised to go further south for the sake of his health. For a while, he remained in Baltimore as an agent of collecting funds for Wesleyan University. In February, he resolved to go and offer himself, as broken out as he was, to the Virginia Conference. This he did. He said because it was better to die to live than to live a long and useless life. Thus he traveled to New Bern, where the Virginia Conference was meeting, pointed to a church in Raleigh. He preached and prayed as long as he could, but in April of 1831, he was forced to retire again due to his health. After being forced to retire from Raleigh, he became interested in the missionary movement, which was sweeping across the whole Christian church. In search of a healthier climate, so that he might pursue preaching, he began to think about going to South America or Europe. In November of 1831, he writes, "I long to preach the good gospel for those who have never heard it. My soul burns with an impatient desire to hold up the cross of Christ on missionary ground." In December of that year, he was offered the editorship of church periodicals, both in Richmond and in Georgia, and also a position as agent for the American Colonization Society for Liberia. First time that appears in the story. The American Colonization Society was organized at Washington, D.C. in 1816 by a group interested in the welfare of American slaves. This group was interested in establishing an African colony for freed American slaves. It was also believed that some of such of the colony might act as an agency for the conversion of Africans to Christianity. In 1821, a tract of land, which today is the Republic of Liberia, was purchased from the native chiefs. A previous site had proven unsuccessful. The dreaded African disease, malaria, took the lives of many of the first settlers who were sent there. At the new site, an area was designated for the town which was to become its capital, Monrovia. From 1821 to 1844, Liberia was an American colony for freed slaves. In 1847, was declared an independent republic. Yeah. I want those of you who get this document to know that I have changed some of the language in the document. Where I use the word Negro, I've transferred that to slavery in my presentation to you, because that's what it really was. When I wrote this in 1961, it was a much more appropriate word, but it's not an appropriate word today to use. So just know that I've changed it, and you can change it. Change it in your own way. Get to the page where I've written stop. So let me just read what's on these 2 pages before I stop. Late in 1831, when Melville Cox was out of a job due to his health and considering the possibility of missions to South America, the Virginia Conference was to meet. In November 1833, he traveled to Norfolk, where the conference was meeting, in order to present to Bishop Heading his 6 reasons for feeling that a mission to South America should be undertaken. Heading listened to Cox and then suggested that he go as a missionary to Liberia. On February 22, in a letter to Bishop Heading, Melville Cox said this: "You may propose me, if you please, to the episcopacy as a missionary to Liberia. If you and they, after advising with each other, should think it fitting for such work, I will go, trusting in the God of missions for the protection and success. It may cure me, it may bury me. In either name, I think I can say from my heart, the will of the Lord be done. I shall go without any fear, which hath torment, which with a cheerful heart, nay, with a glad heart." See, the process was, he was saying to the board of missions people, I want you to have this mission to South America, and I want you to sign me to that kind of a mission. And the board of missions people are saying to him, no, we can't do that. Please go to, but they don't have the ability to send him. The bishop has to send him. So the board of missions needs to recommend him to the bishops before he could go. In April of 1832, Melville traveled to Philadelphia to attend the 6th General Conference, which began on May 1st. On May 7, 1832, he entered into his journal, the episcopacy has concluded to send me to Liberia. I pray that God will fit my soul and body for the duties before me. Then I have no lingering fear. A grave in Africa shall be sweet to me if he sustains me. Isn't it surprising, really, that a broken down man who would have little chance of surviving the African climate, even if he lived long enough to get there, was chosen for such a task? Too often we may get the idea that everyone was in favor of sending Melville Cox to the mission. Barclay states that when agreement was finally reached that Cox should be sent, the action was taken with many misgivings and against the rigorous protest of some. Nevertheless, he was chosen to go and received the formal notice of such an appointment on June 22, 1832. His journey was to be a difficult one, and his mission very short. But his memory lingers long because he had the faith and the courage to go.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop Ives. I just want to point out that Bishop Ives has mentioned the name of Pat Thomas often through his speaking this morning, and Pat is with us. You can see her up on the screen. Thank you, Pat, and welcome. And we also have Nancy Russell with us, who I believe is a member of the Historical Commission. I also want to point out that Harvey Versteeg, one of the members of the Cox Memorial United Methodist Church, is also the representative to the Historical Commission for the conference. And thank you. And Millicent as well. Thank you to both of you.
Can I just, let me just mention one other thing. I mentioned the Grove. There's a section here that talks about the Vaughns who had a big library and who were, he's involved with them. He's a citizen of Hollowell, all those books in the bookstore and all of those kinds of things. But, and then the Grove. I wanted you to remember the Grove, because behind what is the estate of the folks I just mentioned, forget that.
The Vaughn
Of
family.
the Vaughn family. Vaughn Woods is right behind. Vaughn Woods is at the very end of this street. If you drive to the end of the street, you'll see some, even a few parking places, a place for cars to park. It's not a big parking lot there, but there's a trail that goes into Vaughn Woods, and the Vaughn estate is down. And when I walk through there, I think of Marvin. That's what he's talking about. That kind of beautiful place in the woods, which transformed his life.
Can I just tell you something, Bishop Ives? Just so you know that my ancestor was one of the first on that ship going to Liberia that the American Colonization Society put together. We went to the New York Public Library, and his name is on there, William Jefferson McBorough. He was one of the first ones that went to Liberia.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful news.
Amazing time to think that, these our ancestors and others were able to have the courage to move on.
I just thought I would share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So there's just a couple more things that I want to do before we head downstairs for a light luncheon. First of all, there are 4 things that you'll want to see during the course of your time here in Hallowell. 3 of them are right here at the church. And the first is the Melville B. Cox stained glass window, which is right outside the back doors of the sanctuary. So please be sure to visit that. And then Bishop Ives mentioned about the church becoming a United Methodist shrine, and the plaque honoring that event is right in front of our church sign right outside. So be sure to take a look at that. And you will see down in the fellowship hall where we'll be having lunch, this beautiful quilt that was presented to the church by a sister church in Monrovia. And it has been in the fellowship hall for many, many years. And if anyone knows the full story about this gift from our sister church in Monrovia, I would love to hear it, because I've just heard little snippets here and there, and we'd love to know more. And then the last thing is down on Water Street, which is the main street through Hallowell. if you were to go down the hill to Water Street and turn right, about a mile or a little bit less, there's going to be a turnoff right on the river. And at that turnoff, the state of Maine has put up this plaque honoring Melville B. Cox for his importance to this state of Maine as well. As Bishop Ives noted, Maine became a state in 1820, so right during the time when Melville Cox was growing up here in Hallowell. And so it's worthwhile to see and take a picture of. Plus, it's right on the river, which is the Kennebec River. And if you look upriver, you can see the dome of our capital, State House, as well. So it's quite a wonderful place to be. Now, the last thing I want to do is present you with some gifts to take with you to remember your time with us today. Maybe I can get again. As Bishop Ives pointed out, this is a copy of the edited version of his history of Melville Cox.
So much.
And then we have some bookmarks that will remind you of the time of our service tomorrow. I should give that to some other folks. And then one of our members, Corley, sitting right behind you, has made these wonderful Cox UNC keychains. And I just want to make sure that each of you get one of those as well.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so then you can move tomorrow if you want. So at this time then, I close our time together in prayer and welcome you. Harvey,
Just one comment on the marker. When my wife was organizing that, the gentleman at the state that she worked through said that this was the first historic marker put up in the 10 years that he had worked there. And Bishop Ives and the bishop from Monroe, from Liberia, were both
President of that occasion.
Oh, wow.
He's everywhere. Someday we're going to probably change the name to the Cox and Ives Memorial District. Again, thank you for coming. Please join us downstairs for the meal. Let's pray. We are truly grateful, oh God, to be able to come together and learn together about Melville Cox, to see through his short life how his dedication and commitment could result in so many fruits in Liberia and here in Hallowell as well. We just ask now that you would be with our guests as they have opportunity to enjoy this beautiful state and to just have a wonderful time together this weekend. We thank you now for the food we are about to enjoy and ask your blessing upon it and upon our fellowship and conversation together. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And so let us go downstairs. We can either go down the stairs here or you can go down the stairs there. And there's an elevator as well, should you desire. Yeah. Yes.
Is it okay to take a photo real quick?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Together? Right there.
How long will you?
Yes, please.
If you go out this way, we like the window.
Where would you like to stay? Right here. Okay. Who is our official photographer?
We need the official photographer, isn't it?
Harvey is our church official photographer, so we'll get that too.
I'll stand.
precise. Move ahead and not forget. Now, I'm going to ask you a major favor here. Remember this number: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 6, 7. If you would print your name on your number. I didn't know this would be.
From Maryland. Yeah.
My son was born in this town.
I'll be sure to check that out.
I was in Nashville. Retired. Yeah, so I was enrolled many times.
And I'm
Tomorrow, is that what you sent to you, or just bring it in the black one, either way? Okay.
Not yet. Because we have. Blowing up in it's like right front and center.
Huge. I mean, when you start to speak of it,
I do have pictures
it
of
sounds like an understatement. Still, once you start to comprehend that this is huge in that sense, you know what I'm that's fair. See, and I'll give you one sort of experience. I'll get this here through it all the way to the end. We thought the president, respond from his kids. We thought Nobel Prize, first female presidents on Valley College, graduate, then vice president.
It's all about.
I was unfortunate. I was one, not. Yeah, so that's all right.
Get downstairs.